Maya had perfected the art of being invisible. For 3 months at Henderson and Associates, she delivered coffee, sorted mail, and cleaned conference rooms without anyone asking her name. She preferred it that way, blending into the marble walls and glass offices of the 42nd floor, where decisions worth millions happened in languages she thought she'd never understand. But invisibility, Maya would soon discover, doesn't always protect you from destiny. That Tuesday morning started like every other. She balanced the silver tray carefully, counting the ceramic cups. 12 executives, 12 coffees, each prepared exactly as requested. Room 4201. She'd walked this route 100 times, her soft-soled shoes silent against the polished floors. But when she pushed through the heavy oak doors, something felt different. The faces around the mahogany table weren't the usual ones, and the man at the head, tall, silver-haired, with eyes that seemed to catch everything, was someone she'd only seen in newspaper photos hanging in the lobby. "Excuse me," Maya whispered, her voice barely audible above the hum of the air conditioning. "I think I have the wrong." "No," the man said, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had built a global empire. "You're exactly where you need to be. Have you ever wondered what happens when the universe conspires to put you in a room you never thought you belonged in? What if the very thing that makes you feel invisible is actually preparing you to be seen by the one person who matters most?" Maya's hands trembled as she gripped the silver tray. The coffee cups rattled softly, a sound that seemed to echo in the sudden silence. Jonathan Henderson. She knew his name from the brass nameplate on the executive floor directory, gestured toward an empty chair at the far end of the table. "Please," he said simply. "Sit." The 12 executives stared at her with expressions ranging from confusion to barely concealed irritation. Maya recognized most of them from her invisible rounds. Mr. Peterson from acquisitions, who always left his coffee half finished. Ms. Rodriguez from legal, who worked later than anyone else. Mr. Chun from international relations, whose office was always perfectly organized. They knew her as furniture, as background. Now she was center stage, and the spotlight burned. "I really should," Maya began, but Jonathan raised a gentle hand. "You should stay," he said. "Something tells me we need a fresh perspective today." Maya's employee badge felt heavier against her chest as she moved toward the chair. The temporary ID card, white instead of the gold that marked permanent employees, swayed as she walked. Each step felt like crossing an ocean. When she finally sat down, the leather chair seemed to swallow her whole. "Now then," Jonathan continued, as if having the coffee girl join a board meeting was the most natural thing in the world. "Where were we?" Maya's fingers traced the edge of the leather-bound presentation folder that Mr. Chun had placed in front of her. The same type of folder she'd seen scattered across dozens of desks during her cleaning rounds. She'd learned not to look too closely at the documents inside, understanding instinctively that invisibility meant willful blindness to the secrets contained in those papers. But now, with Jonathan Henderson's expectant gaze upon her, she realized that her strategic ignorance might have been a mistake. "I observe more than I probably should," Maya admitted, her voice growing slightly stronger. "When you're invisible, people forget you're there. They have conversations, leave documents open, take phone calls they might not otherwise take with someone listening." Mr. Peterson shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Maya remembered cleaning his office last week. Wow. He'd argued loudly with someone about quarterly projections, his voice carrying through the thin walls to adjacent offices. She'd also noticed the empty whiskey bottles in his wastebasket, but that observation would remain her secret. "Today's meeting," Ms. Rodriguez began, opening her own leather folder with crisp efficiency, "focuses on our Barcelona partnership. Crisis. Industrias Mediterráneo has threatened to terminate their contract due to what they call fundamental miscommunications in our joint venture agreements." Maya's attention sharpened. She'd seen those documents, not intentionally, but when Mr. Chun had left them spread across his desk while taking an urgent phone call. She'd been dusting his bookshelf, as invisible as the furniture, when he'd stepped out to handle the crisis call. The Spanish text had caught her eye, and she'd noticed something that had bothered her even then. "The translation errors are costing U.S. a $200 million partnership," Mr. Chung continued, his usually calm demeanor showing cracks of stress. Our Madrid office insists their translations are accurate, but Industrias Mediterráneo CEO Elena Vasquez claims we've misunderstood fundamental cultural protocols. Maya's heart began to race. She knew Elena Vasquez, not personally, but by reputation. Her father had worked for one of Vasquez's smaller companies years ago, and Maya remembered the stories about how particular she was about respect and proper communication. In her family's culture, the way you addressed someone, the formality, level you chose, could make or break a business relationship. What specifically are they objecting to? Jonathan asked, his pen tapping rhythmically against his notepad. They claim our proposals show disrespect for their company hierarchy, Ms. Rodriguez replied, consulting her notes. They say we're addressing Elena Vasquez as if she were a middle manager rather than a company founder. Our translators insist. The Spanish is correct. Maya felt her stomach drop. She'd seen this exact mistake in the documents on Mr. Chan's desk. The translation was technically correct. The grammar was perfect. The vocabulary precise. But it was all wrong. The translators had used T-form language structures throughout, appropriate for casual business communications, but insulting when addressing a company founder of Elena Vasquez's stature. It was like addressing the Queen of England as if she were your college roommate. Has anyone considered consulting with additional translation services? Jonathan asked. We've used Henderson's standard translation contractor for 15 years, Mr. Peterson replied defensively. They've never failed us before. Maya watched the executives debate solutions that danced around the real problem. They were approaching this as a business crisis, but it was actually a cultural misunderstanding, one that could be fixed with a simple adjustment in tone and formality. She'd learned these nuances growing up, translating for her parents at parent-teacher conferences and doctor's appointments. Respect wasn't just about words. It was about understanding the invisible hierarchies that governed human interaction. The leather folder in front of her seemed to grow heavier as the discussion continued. Inside, she knew, were documents that could save a $200 million partnership. All she had to do was find the courage to speak. Maya's mind raced as she sat in the oversized leather chair, her temporary employee badge catching the morning light streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The white plastic card seemed to announce her outsider status to everyone in the room, a stark contrast to the golden badges worn by the permanent staff surrounding her. She clutched the edge of the table, trying to anchor herself to something solid as her world tilted off its axis dot. Just 6 months ago, she'd been sleeping on her cousin's couch in Queens, her linguistics degree from City College gathering dust, while she applied for jobs that never called back. The temp agency had offered her this position: cleaning offices, delivering mail, making coffee, and she'd taken it gratefully. It wasn't the career she'd dreamed of, but it paid the rent on her tiny studio, apartment, and kept food on the table. Now she was sitting in a boardroom that probably cost more than her annual salary, surrounded by people who made decisions that affected thousands of lives. The irony wasn't lost on her that she'd spent weeks cleaning this very room, emptying their trash, wiping down the same table, invisible to the very people who now stared at her with undisguised curiosity. Perhaps we should continue with the quarterly reports, suggested Miss Rodriguez, her voice carrying a hint of impatience. Maya had always liked Miss Rodriguez. She was one of the few executives who said thank you when Maya refilled her coffee. But even she seemed uncomfortable with this disruption to their carefully orchestrated routine. Jonathan Henderson studied Maya with those piercing gray eyes that had intimidated CEOs and charmed world leaders. She'd read about him in the financial magazines left behind in conference rooms. The self-made billionaire who'd built Henderson and Associates from a small consulting firm into a global powerhouse. His reputation was built on seeing potential where others saw problems, on finding value in overlooked assets. Actually, Jonathan said, leaning back in his chair, I'd like to hear from our newest participant first. Maya, isn't it? Her heart stopped. He knew her name. In 3 months of invisible service, she'd never imagined that anyone above the facilities manager level even knew she existed, much less remembered what she was called. Yes, sir, she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. What do you do? Here, Maya? The question seemed simple, but she sensed layers beneath it. What did she do? She made coffee that kept exhausted executives functioning through 18-hour days. She cleaned offices that needed to be pristine for million-dollar negotiations. She sorted mail that connected this building to every corner of the global economy. She was the invisible infrastructure that kept their visible world running. I deliver coffee, sir, and clean, and sort mail. And what do you observe while you're doing those things? The room fell silent. Maya realized that Jonathan Henderson wasn't just making polite conversation. He was genuinely curious about her perspective, the view from the bottom of the hierarchy, the insights that came from being everywhere and nowhere at once. In her small locker in the basement facility's break room, Maya kept a worn Spanish-English dictionary that had belonged to her grandmother. The pages were yellowed and soft from constant use, filled with margin notes in 3 different handwritings. Grandmother's careful script, her mother's hurried scrawl, and her own precise annotations from college. She'd brought it to work on her first day, thinking she might have time to study during breaks, to keep her linguistic skills sharp. Instead, it had sat untouched for 3 months, a reminder of dreams deferred. Maya had been 7 years old when she first became her family's voice. Her parents spoke excellent Spanish and functional English, but the complex language of school administrators, doctors, and bureaucrats often left them adrift. Maya became their bridge to the American world, translating not just words, but entire cultural concepts that didn't exist in Spanish. She learned early that translation was never just about language. It was about understanding the unspoken rules that governed how people communicated respect, authority, and intention. Not now. Listening to the executive's struggle with Elena Vasquez's objections, Maya felt the familiar weight of unspoken knowledge. She understood both sides of this cultural divide because she'd lived in the space between them her entire life. The Henderson and Associates translators had done exactly what they'd been trained to do: convert Spanish words into English words with technical accuracy. But they'd missed the music beneath the words, the delicate harmonies of respect and hierarchy that made communication meaningful. Perhaps if we offered Elena Vasquez a face-to-face meeting, suggested Mr. Chun, we could clarify any misunderstandings directly. Maya winced internally. That would only make things worse. Elena Vasquez wasn't looking for more conversation. She was looking for evidence that Henderson and Associates understood her worth. A face-to-face meeting conducted with the same tone-deaf approach would be interpreted as doubling down on disrespect. The quarterly reports show that this partnership represents 30% of our European expansion strategy, Ms. Rodriguez added, her voice tight with stress. If we lose Industrias Mediterraneo, we lose our foothold in the Spanish market entirely. Maya's hands trembled slightly as she imagined herself speaking up. She could explain the difference between formal and informal address structures in Spanish. She could describe how Elena Vasquez's generation of business leaders expected to be approached with the same linguistic deference shown to university professors or government officials. She could solve this entire crisis with a 5-minute explanation of cultural nuance. But she was the coffee girl. She was temporary staff with a white badge and scuffed shoes. She was someone who cleaned up after these meetings, not someone who participated in them. Her grandmother's dictionary might be filled with wisdom, but wisdom meant nothing if you didn't have the authority to share it. What if the problem isn't the translation itself, but the level of formality? The words escaped before Maya could stop them, spoken so quietly that she wondered if anyone had heard. The room fell silent. 12 pairs of eyes turned toward her, and Maya felt her face burn with embarrassment. She'd broken the unspoken rule that had kept her safe for 3 months. The rule that invisible people should remain silent. Go on, Jonathan said gently, his gray eyes encouraging rather than judgmental. Maya took a shaky breath, knowing that her next words would either change her life or cost her the only job she'd been able to find. Maya's hands shook as she reached for a pen from the crystal holder at the center of the mahogany table. The handwritten note she was about to create would either vindicate her moment of courage or expose her as an imposter who'd overstepped every boundary of her position. She pulled a piece of letterhead toward her Henderson and Associates stationery that she'd only seen before when filing documents or disposing of discarded drafts. Elena Vasquez founded Industrias Mediterraneo 47 years ago. Maya began, her voice gaining strength as she wrote. In Spanish business culture, especially among her generation, the way you address someone conveys not just respect, but recognition of their achievements and status. Your translators used casual business language, what we call teteo, throughout. The contract proposals, she wrote quickly, translating key phrases from the documents she'd glimpsed on Mr. Chun's desk. Her handwriting was careful but urgent, each word carrying the weight of a $200 million partnership. To Elena Vasquez, this feels like being addressed as if she's an entry-level employee rather than a company founder. It's not about the words being wrong, they're grammatically perfect. It's about them being inappropriately informal for someone of her stature. Mr. Peterson leaned forward, skepticism clear in his expression. You're suggesting that our crisis is essentially a problem of politeness? Maya looked up from her note, meeting his gaze directly for the first time. I'm suggesting that respect has its own language, and we haven't been speaking it correctly. She continued writing, translating several key phrases from the contract, proposals into the formal register that would be appropriate for addressing Elena Vasquez. The difference was subtle, but crucial, using usted instead of t, adding honorific phrases that acknowledged her position, structuring sentences in ways that conveyed deference without subservience. For example, Maya said, holding up her handwritten note, instead of "we want you to consider our proposal," the translation should read, "we would be honored if you would consider our proposal." In English, the difference seems minimal. In formal Spanish business culture, it's the difference between respect and rudeness. Ms. Rodriguez reached for the note, scanning Maya's careful translations with growing interest. These changes, they're significant? To Elena Vasquez, they're everything, Maya replied. She's not just reading a contract proposal. She's evaluating whether Henderson and Associates sees her as an equal partner worthy of respect, or as someone who can be addressed casually because the deal is important to her too. Maya thought of her father, who had worked for years in construction, enduring supervisors who spoke to him with barely concealed condescension. She remembered how his face would light up when a rare foreman addressed him with genuine respect, using his title, acknowledging his expertise. Dignity, she'd learned, wasn't a luxury. It was a necessity that affected every subsequent interaction. But how could you possibly know this level of detail about Elena Vasquez specifically? Mr. Chun asked, his tone curious rather than challenging. Maya hesitated, then decided that transparency was her only viable strategy. My father worked for one of her smaller companies years ago. Elena Vasquez has a reputation in the Latino business community for being brilliant but traditional in her expectations of professional respect. She's terminated contracts with companies that couldn't demonstrate appropriate cultural awareness. The handwritten note felt heavy in Maya's fingers as she placed it on the table. 3 months of invisible observation had taught her to read the room, and she could see the executives processing this information, weighing the credibility of insights coming from their coffee girl against the potential cost of ignoring her. Advice: if these translation adjustments could salvage the partnership, Jonathan said slowly, how would you suggest we proceed? Maya realized that he was asking her for a strategic recommendation, not just a cultural explanation. The coffee girl was being consulted as if she were an expert, and the terrifying part was that, in this specific area, she actually was. The revised contract proposals should be personally delivered with a formal letter of apology for any previous cultural insensitivity, she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Elena Vasquez needs to see that Henderson and Associates recognizes the importance of respectful communication. She had just given strategic advice to the senior leadership of a global consulting firm. There was no going back to invisibility now. The conference room microphone sat innocuously at the center of the table, a sleek black device that Maya had dusted countless times without ever imagining it would amplify her voice. Now Jonathan Henderson was reaching for it, adjusting the settings with the casual efficiency of someone accustomed to being heard. Maya, he said, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had built a business empire, I'd like you to explain your recommendations to the entire executive team. Please speak into the microphone so everyone can hear clearly. Maya's throat felt dry as sandpaper. The microphone represented everything she'd spent 3 months avoiding: attention, scrutiny, the terrifying possibility of being wrong in front of people whose annual salaries exceeded her lifetime earnings. But silence now would mean watching a partnership collapse when she knew exactly how to save it. She leaned toward the microphone, her voice barely above a whisper at first. The core issue with Elena Vasquez isn't the contract terms. It's the cultural framework we've used to present them. Her words echoed slightly in the large conference room, amplified and clarified by technology that made her sound more authoritative than she felt. The executives leaned forward, their earlier skepticism replaced by focused attention. Informal, Spanish business culture, Maya continued, her voice growing stronger. Respect is communicated through linguistic hierarchy. Elena Vasquez has spent nearly 50 years building Industrias Mediterráneo. When we address her with casual business language, we're inadvertently suggesting that her achievements don't merit formal recognition. Mr. Peterson's expression had shifted from dismissive to intrigue. You're saying the translation was technically correct, but culturally inappropriate. Exactly, Maya replied, finding her rhythm now. It's like the difference between addressing a federal judge as Your Honor versus Hey, you. Both communicate the same basic information, but only one shows appropriate respect for the position. She thought of her grandmother, who had taught her that language was power, the power to include or exclude, to honor or diminish, to build bridges or burn them down. Every word choice carried consequence, especially when crossing cultural boundaries. The solution is to retranslate the entire contract proposal using formal register Spanish. Maya explained, her confidence growing with each sentence. Every reference to Elena Vasquez and her company should use the most respectful language possible. Additionally, the cover letter should acknowledge that our previous communications may not have adequately conveyed our deep respect for her achievements and position. Ms. Rodriguez was taking notes rapidly. How long would such revisions take? Maya considered this carefully. If I were to oversee the retranslation, ensuring cultural appropriateness alongside linguistic accuracy, perhaps 2 days for a complete revision of all partnership documents. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Maya had just volunteered to take responsibility for a $200 million partnership crisis, stepping completely out of her role as invisible support staff into something resembling actual authority. Jonathan Henderson smiled, the first genuine smile Maya had seen from him. Maya, how would you like to become our consultant on this project? Maya's university transcript lay buried beneath a stack of unpaid bills in her studio apartment, a painful reminder of dreams interrupted by economic reality. The document represented 4 years of sacrifice, working multiple jobs while maintaining a 3.9 GPA in comparative linguistics. Writing her senior thesis on cultural communication patterns in international business, graduating summa cum laude with plans to pursue graduate work in applied linguistics. Then her father's construction accident had changed everything, and the transcript became just another piece of paper documenting a path not taken. Now, sitting in a conference room worth more than her annual salary, Maya found herself describing that abandoned academic journey to 12 executives who listened with growing amazement. I specialized in the intersection of language and cultural hierarchy, she explained, her voice gaining confidence as she spoke about something she genuinely understood. My thesis examined how Spanish-speaking business leaders use linguistic formality to establish and maintain professional relationships. Elena Vasquez was actually one of my case studies. The executives exchanged glances that Maya had learned to read during her months of invisible observation. They were recalibrating their understanding of who she was, just the coffee girl who'd stumbled into their meeting, but someone with actual expertise relevant to their crisis. You wrote a thesis about Elena Vasquez specifically? Mr. Chun asked, leaning forward with genuine interest. About leaders like her, Maya clarified. First-generation entrepreneurs who built international companies while maintaining traditional Spanish business protocols. Elena Vasquez represents a generation that views business communication as an extension of personal honor. Every linguistic choice either reinforces or undermines the respect they've earned through decades of achievement. Maya thought of the interviews she'd conducted for her research, speaking with Latino business leaders who described the subtle ways that linguistic respect or its absence affected their willingness to engage with American companies. She documented pattern after pattern of failed partnerships that could have been saved with better cultural awareness. The reason your standard translation services failed, Maya continued, is that they approach Spanish as a uniform language. But Spanish varies dramatically based on region, generation, and social context. Elena Vasquez's Spanish isn't just Spanish, it's the formal register Spanish of a 70-year-old Catalan business founder who has spent 50 years demanding recognition in a male-dominated industry. Ms. Rodriguez was typing rapidly on her laptop. This level of specialization, ... Where did you complete your degree? City College, Maya replied, then immediately worried that her public university education would seem inadequate compared to the Ivy League credentials that probably filled this room. I couldn't afford the private universities with stronger linguistics programs. But City College had an excellent professor who specialized in business anthropology. And after graduation? Jonathan asked gently. Maya hesitated, then decided that honesty was her only viable strategy. My father was injured on a construction site. The medical bills and lost income meant I needed to work immediately rather than pursue graduate school. I've been applying for positions in translation and cultural consulting for 6 months, but most require experience I couldn't afford to gain. The room fell silent, and Maya realized she'd just exposed the economic realities that had led a summa cum laude linguistics graduate to accept work as temporary cleaning staff. She waited for the judgment, the dismissal, the polite suggestion that she wasn't qualified for executive-level consultation, despite her obvious expertise. Instead, Jonathan Henderson leaned back in his chair and smiled. Maya, I think we've been underutilizing your talents rather dramatically. How would you feel about serving as our cultural liaison for the Elena Vasquez partnership with appropriate compensation and recognition? Of course, the scholarship certificate hung in a simple black frame on the wall of Maya's studio apartment, positioned where she could see it from her small kitchen table, but hidden from casual visitors. Outstanding achievement in linguistic studies. It read, awarded by the Department of Modern Languages for her research into cross-cultural business communication. She'd received it during her senior year, along with a letter encouraging her to apply for graduate fellowships. The letter was still tucked behind the certificate, another reminder of the path that circumstances had forced her to abandon. Maya had never told anyone at Henderson and Associates about the scholarship, just as she'd never mentioned her magna cum laude graduation or her thesis defense, where professors had suggested she pursue doctoral work. Those achievements belonged to a different version of herself, the Maya who had believed that merit and hard work guaranteed opportunity, before she learned that economic necessity could override academic excellence. I need you to understand something, Maya said to the room of executives, her voice carrying a vulnerability she hadn't intended to reveal. 6 months ago, I was sleeping on my cousin's couch in Queens because I couldn't afford my own apartment, despite having what I thought was a valuable education. I took this job because it was the only offer I received, not because it matched my qualifications. Mr. Peterson shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Maya suspected he was calculating how many qualified candidates they might have overlooked, how much talent was currently delivering their coffee and cleaning their offices, while they focused exclusively on candidates with the right connections and financial freedom to pursue unpaid internships. The scholarship I received was for research into exactly the type of crisis we're facing today, Maya continued, drawing strength from the memory of her professor's encouragement. I documented 17 different cases of international partnerships that failed due to cultural miscommunication. Elena Vasquez's reaction to your contract proposals follows a predictable pattern that could have been avoided with proper cultural preparation. She thought of the hours she'd spent in the university library, interviewing business leaders who described the frustration of being misunderstood by American companies that assumed English language business norms translated universally. Those interviews had shaped her understanding of how respect functioned differently across cultures, how language could either facilitate or destroy trust. Why didn't you apply for positions in cultural consulting or international business when you graduated? Ms. Rodriguez asked, her tone curious rather than accusatory. Maya's smile was tinged with irony. I did, repeatedly, but most firms require experience that's difficult to gain without economic privilege. Unpaid internships, volunteer work abroad, graduate degrees that require full-time study, all paths that assume you can afford to work without immediate income. Jonathan Henderson nodded slowly, and Maya suspected he was remembering his own early career, the advantages that had allowed him to take risks and build his empire. We've been recruiting from a very narrow pool. He sighed thoughtfully. The irony, Maya added, is that my economic background actually enhances my cultural expertise. I understand what it feels like to be underestimated, dismissed, or misunderstood because of circumstances beyond your control. That perspective makes me better at recognizing when business communications inadvertently convey disrespect. The scholarship certificate in her apartment represented more than academic achievement. It was evidence that merit existed even when opportunity didn't. Now, finally, the two were converging in ways she'd never imagined possible. Maya's desk in the facilities office had always been notably empty, no business card holder, no nameplate, no personal items that suggested permanence or professional identity. Her temporary status was reflected in every detail of her workspace: the borrowed supplies, the shared computer, the understanding that nothing here truly belonged to her. She was passing through, invisible and impermanent, until something better came along. Now Jonathan Henderson was offering to change all of that with a single impromptu decision that would transform her from temporary staff to senior consultant overnight. The Elena Vasquez partnership is worth $200 million, he said, his gray eyes serious but encouraging. If your cultural expertise can salvage this relationship, you'll have earned not just our gratitude, but a permanent position as our Director of International Cultural Affairs. Maya felt her breath catch. Director. The title implied authority, respect, decision-making power, everything she dreamed of when she graduated with honors, but never dared hope for when she accepted a temporary cleaning position. The business card holder that had sat empty on her desk could finally hold cards with her name and title, but doubt crept in immediately. Mr. Henderson, I appreciate the offer, but I should point out that I have no corporate experience. I've never managed a team, never presented to clients, never handled the level of responsibility you're describing. Mr. Peterson leaned forward, his earlier skepticism now replaced by pragmatic concern. Jonathan, perhaps we should consider bringing Maya in as a consultant while we also explore more established cultural liaison services. This is an enormous leap from support staff to director level. Maya understood his concern, even appreciated it. She was asking them to trust someone who had been invisible for 3 months, whose qualifications were hidden behind economic necessity rather than proven in corporate settings. The logical approach would be to test her abilities on smaller projects, to verify her expertise through incremental responsibilities. But Ms. Rodriguez had been studying Maya's handwritten translations, comparing them with the original contract documents. Actually, she said, Maya's analysis is more sophisticated than anything our regular translation services have provided. She's not just correcting language, she's identifying the cultural subtext that we completely missed. Maya felt torn between gratitude and terror. The opportunity was everything she'd worked toward, but accepting it meant stepping completely out of her comfort zone into a world where her mistakes would be measured in millions of dollars rather than improperly cleaned coffee cups. I need time to consider this, Maya said finally. This morning I was delivering coffee, and now you're offering me a director position. I want to make sure I can deliver the results you need rather than just the results you hope for. Jonathan smiled approvingly. That level of self-awareness suggests you're exactly the right person for the job. Take the time you need to decide. But Maya, don't let fear of failure prevent you from seizing an opportunity you've genuinely earned. The empty business card holder on her desk suddenly seemed full of possibilities. The family photograph on Maya's kitchen table showed her parents standing proudly in front of Restaurante Elena, the small Mexican restaurant they'd owned briefly when Maya was in high school. Her father wore his best shirt, and her mother's smile was radiant with hope, both of them believing that their American dream was finally within reach. The restaurant had failed within 18 months, not because the food wasn't excellent, but because they'd struggled to navigate the complex web of permits, regulations, and cultural expectations that governed American small business. Maya had watched her parents' dreams crumble under the weight of systems they didn't fully understand. Despite their intelligence and work ethic, now, staring at that photograph While holding her phone, Maya realized that Jonathan Henderson's offer represented everything her parents had sacrificed to make possible. They had immigrated with advanced degrees that weren't recognized in the United States, working construction and cleaning jobs, while Maya attended school. Every late night her father spent learning English. Every double shift her mother worked. To pay for Maya's textbooks had been an investment in this moment. Mia, her father's voice was warm with pride when she called to tell them about the offer. We always knew you were destined for something important. Remember when you were 7 and you translated for us at the parent-teacher conference? You made that teacher understand that we cared about your education, even though our English wasn't perfect. Maya remembered that day vividly. Mrs. Patterson had been frustrated by the language barrier until Maya stepped in, translating not just words but emotions. Her parents' deep commitment to her education, their fears about navigating an unfamiliar system, their determination to support her success despite their own limitations. It had been her first experience with the power of cultural bridge building. But what if I fail? Maya asked, voicing the fear that had been gnawing at her since leaving the Henderson and Associates building. What if I'm not ready for this level of responsibility? Her mother's voice carried the gentle firmness that had guided Maya through childhood. Mia, you've been preparing for this your entire life. Every time you translated for us, every time you helped other families understand their children's school paperwork, every time you explained American customs to your cousins, you were practicing to be exactly who you are today. Maya looked again at the photograph, seeing not just her parents' failed restaurant, but their unwavering belief in education as a path to opportunity. They had given up their own professional dreams so Maya could pursue hers. Staying invisible in a support staff position would dishonor those sacrifices. I'm going to accept the offer, Maya said, feeling a certainty that surprised her. But I'm terrified. Her father's laughter was rich with understanding. Good. Fear means you understand how important this is. But remember, Mia, you're not just representing yourself. You're opening doors for everyone who looks like us, who talks like us, who has dreams like ours. The photograph seemed to shimmer with possibility as Maya realized she was about to transform from invisible support staff into someone who could create opportunities for others like her family. The temporary office key felt substantial in Maya's palm, a small brass weight that represented her. Tentative entry into the executive world she'd observed from the margins for 3 months. Room 4156 was smaller than the corner offices reserved for senior partners, but it had a window overlooking the city and a nameplate that read Maya Santos, Cultural Affairs Consultant. Seeing her name in gold lettering felt surreal, like stepping into someone else's life. Maya's first morning as a consultant began with the uncomfortable realization that she had no idea what to wear. Her cleaning uniforms had provided clear guidance, but professional attire for someone consulting on million-dollar partnerships was uncharted territory. She'd settled on her best interview suit, a navy ensemble, purchased for job interviews that had never materialized, and hoped it conveyed competence rather than inexperience. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor felt different now. Instead of riding up with cleaning supplies and coffee service, Maya carried a leather briefcase that Jonathan Henderson's assistant had provided, containing the Elena Vasquez partnership documents and her notes on cultural revision strategies. The familiar security guard nodded respectfully rather than with the casual acknowledgement reserved for support staff. But the cold reception from some executives made it clear that not everyone was comfortable with her rapid ascension. Maya noticed whispered conversations that stopped when she approached, skeptical glances that followed her through hallways she'd previously navigated invisibly. She understood their concerns. She was an unknown quantity, promoted based on a single meeting rather than years of proven corporate performance. Maya, Ms. Rodriguez greeted her warmly as she passed the legal department. I've been reviewing your translation revisions. They're remarkably sophisticated. Where did you learn to adjust registers so precisely for different cultural contexts? Years of translating for my family, Maya replied honestly. You learn quickly that the same information can be received completely differently depending on how respectfully you present it. Maya spent her first morning reviewing the complete Elena Vasquez file, understanding for the first time the full scope of the partnership that hung in the balance. Industrias Mediterraneo wasn't just another client. They were Henderson and Associates' gateway to the entire Spanish market. Elena Vasquez's approval or rejection would determine whether the firm could expand its European operations or remain limited to English-speaking countries. The cultural missteps were even more extensive than Maya had realized. Beyond the translation issues, the initial proposal had violated several protocols that Elena Vasquez would consider fundamental to respectful business relationships. The Americans had suggested meeting locations without considering her preferences, proposed timeline structures that ignored Spanish business customs, and failed to acknowledge her company's 47-year history of successful operations. Maya's phone rang mid-morning, her direct line, another symbol of her new status. Jonathan Henderson's voice was calm but urgent. Maya, Elena Vasquez has agreed to a conference call this afternoon to discuss revised partnership terms. I'd like you to participate as our cultural affairs representative. Maya's stomach dropped. She'd been consulting for exactly 4 hours. And now she would be speaking directly with the business leader who had been the subject of her senior thesis research. The irony wasn't lost on her that she knew more about Elena Vasquez's communication preferences than about corporate conference call protocols. I'll be ready, Maya said, projecting confidence she didn't feel. Should I prepare talking points about the cultural revisions we're implementing? Trust your expertise, Jonathan replied. You understand Elena Vasquez better than anyone else in this building. Just be yourself. As Maya hung up the phone, she realized that being herself was exactly what had gotten her into this position. The question now was whether herself would be enough to save a $200 million partnership. The anonymous complaint letter arrived on Maya's desk 3 days after her successful conference call with Elena Vasquez. Typed on plain paper without signature, it questioned her qualifications, suggested favoritism in her rapid promotion, and recommended a formal review of hiring practices for senior consultants. Maya read it twice, her hands trembling slightly as she recognized the institutional resistance that had kept people like her invisible for generations. Concerns have been raised regarding the appointment of unqualified personnel to positions requiring extensive corporate experience. The letter read, while Ms. Santos may possess academic credentials, her lack of proven business success raises questions about the wisdom of entrusting major client relationships to inexperienced staff. Maya understood the subtext. She was an outsider who had skipped the traditional corporate ladder, promoted based on a single demonstration of expertise rather than years of incremental advancement. The letter didn't mention her ethnicity or economic background directly, but those factors hung unspoken in every carefully worded criticism. The whispered conversations became less subtle after the letter's circulation. Maya overheard fragments of discussion in the break room. Don't understand why Henderson is taking such risks. And setting a dangerous precedent for promotion standards. The phrases stung because they contained kernels of legitimate concern wrapped in thinly veiled resentment. Mr. Peterson was particularly cool in his interactions, his earlier pragmatic skepticism hardening into active resistance. During the weekly staff meeting, he questioned Maya's recommendations with aggressive precision, demanding detailed justification for cultural protocols that would have been accepted without question from established consultants. Maya suggests that we should modify our standard contract language for all Spanish-speaking clients. He announced to the room, his tone suggesting that the idea was presumptuous. I'm wondering if this level of customization is practical for a firm that manages hundreds of international relationships. Maya felt the familiar heat of being spotlighted, but her response was steadier now. I'm not suggesting wholesale changes to established protocols. I'm recommending cultural sensitivity adjustments for specific contexts where standard approaches have proven ineffective. But how do we know that your approach will be more effective than our established methods? Peterson pressed. Elena Vasquez may have responded positively to one conference call, but that's hardly proof of systematic improvement. Maya realized that she was fighting 2 battles simultaneously, proving her competence while defending her right to occupy space that others believed she hadn't earned. The invisible position had been safer, but it had also been powerless. Now she had influence, But that influence came with the constant pressure to justify her existence. Mrs. Rodriguez intervened with diplomatic firmness. Maya's cultural analysis prevented the loss of the $200 million partnership. I think that result speaks for itself, but Maya knew that one success wouldn't silence the skeptics. She needed to prove herself repeatedly, performing at levels that would be considered excellent for established consultants, but were merely acceptable for someone who had violated the traditional hierarchy. The anonymous letter remained on her desk as a reminder that visibility came with vulnerability. Some people would always see her promotion as undeserved rather than overdue, her expertise as lucky insight rather than earned knowledge. The real test would be whether she could maintain her confidence while constantly defending her qualifications to people who would never question a similarly qualified candidate with the right background and connections. The contract draft that landed on Maya's desk carried weight beyond its 47 pages of legal language. It represented the final test of whether Elena Vasquez would commit to the revised partnership terms. Every translation had to be perfect, every cultural nuance precisely calibrated, because there would be no opportunity for correction. The document would either secure Henderson and Associates' entry into the Spanish market or end their European expansion dreams entirely. Maya spread the pages across her desk, noting immediately that someone had attempted to sabotage her work. Key sections had been pre-translated using the same casually informal language that had offended Elena Vasquez initially. Despite Maya's explicit instructions for formal register throughout, the sabotage was subtle but unmistakable pronouns that suggested familiarity rather than respect. Verb forms that implied casual business relationships rather than formal partnerships. She suspected Mr. Peterson's involvement, though proving it would be difficult. The changes were technically correct Spanish, which meant they would pass superficial review while undermining the cultural sensitivity that Elena Vasquez demanded. It was the perfect corporate sabotage, plausibly deniable but potentially devastating. Maya had 6 hours before the contract needed to be submitted to Elena Vasquez's legal team. 6 hours to completely retranslate 47 pages while ensuring that every cultural protocol was meticulously observed. She called her assistant to cancel her lunch meeting and began the process of rebuilding the document from scratch. The pressure was unlike anything she'd experienced in her academic work. University deadlines were serious, but they didn't carry the weight of $200 million and the professional futures of hundreds of employees. Maya felt the eyes of skeptics waiting for her to fail, ready to use any mistake as evidence that her promotion had been premature. As she worked, Maya drew on years of cultural observation that extended far beyond her university training. She thought of her grandmother's stories about navigating Spanish bureaucracy, where the wrong level of formality could delay important documents for months. She remembered her father's frustration with American contractors who spoke to him as if his accent indicated incompetence rather than bilingual ability. Elena Vasquez's generation of business leaders had built their success while constantly proving their competence to people who underestimated them. They demanded linguistic respect because they'd been denied social respect too often. Maya understood this dynamic personally, the exhausting requirement to be twice as good to be considered half as qualified. By mid-afternoon, Maya had reconstructed the entire contract using the most respectful formal Spanish she could craft. Every reference to Elena Vasquez included appropriate honorifics. Every business term was chosen to convey partnership rather than subordination. The language was elegant without being flowery, respectful without being obsequious. But the real test came when Jonathan Henderson called an emergency meeting to review the final draft. The room included not just the usual executives, but also the company's external legal counsel lawyers who had flown in from New York, specifically to review this contract. Maya's work would be scrutinized by people who charged $1,000 an hour for their expertise. "Walk us through the key cultural adjustments," Jonathan requested, his gray eyes serious but supportive. Maya's presentation was comprehensive but concise, explaining how each linguistic choice reinforced the respect that Elena Vasquez expected from potential partners. She addressed questions about legal implications, cultural variations across Spanish-speaking countries, and implementation strategies for future international contracts. Mr. Peterson challenged several of her recommendations. But Maya's responses were backed by specific examples from her research and clear explanations of cultural logic. She realized that the skeptic's attacks had actually strengthened her expertise. She'd been forced to develop deeper justifications for approaches that felt intuitive to her when the external lawyers approved the contract. Language and complemented Maya's sophisticated understanding of international business protocols. She felt a quiet satisfaction that had nothing to do with proving others wrong and everything to do with proving herself right. The contract was submitted to Elena Vasquez's team at exactly 4:47 p.m., 13 minutes before the deadline. Maya's invisible expertise had become undeniably visible under the highest possible stakes. The Henderson and Associates Company newsletter featured Maya's photograph on the front page, a professional headshot that still felt surreal to see in print. "Cultural expertise saves major partnership," read the headline, followed by an article describing how her linguistic analysis had rescued the Elena Vasquez deal and opened new possibilities for international expansion. Maya stared at her own image, remembering 3 months earlier when she'd been invisible enough to clean the offices where this newsletter was produced. The article's publication triggered an unexpected wave of responses from other employees throughout the building. Maya received emails from administrative assistants who mentioned their own language skills, from security guards who had degrees in fields unrelated to their current positions, from facilities staff who had professional expertise that nobody had thought to explore. "I have an MBA from the Philippines," wrote Maria Santos from the accounting department. "I've been doing data entry for 2 years, but I have experience in international financial analysis. I speak 4 languages and have a master's degree in international relations," emailed James Chun from the mailroom. "I've been trying to transition into consulting work, but most firms want experience I can't afford to gain." Maya realized that Henderson and Associates was filled with hidden talent, people whose economic circumstances or lack of connections had relegated them to positions that vastly underutilized their capabilities. Her success had given them permission to speak up about their own overlooked qualifications. Jonathan Henderson called Maya into his office after the newsletter's distribution, his expression thoughtful. "It seems your story has resonated with quite a few employees. I'm receiving recommendations for other staff members who might benefit from expanded opportunities." Maya had been hoping for exactly this conversation. "I think we're missing enormous potential by limiting our recruitment to traditional channels. Some of our most capable people are already here. We just haven't asked the right questions about their backgrounds." Her role began expanding beyond cultural consultation to include talent identification and development. Maya started conducting informal interviews with staff members who had reached out, documenting their qualifications and identifying opportunities for professional growth within the company structure. The work felt like a natural extension of her cultural bridge-building expertise. Just as she'd learned to translate between Spanish and English business cultures, she was now translating between different definitions of professional worth, helping the company see value in people they'd previously overlooked. Ms. Rodriguez became an ally in these efforts, working with Maya to develop pathways for internal advancement that didn't require employees to abandon financial stability while proving their capabilities. They created part-time consulting opportunities, skills assessment programs, and mentorship structures that could identify and develop hidden talent. Maya's confidence grew with each success story. She was no longer just proving her own worth, she was helping others discover theirs. The invisible position she'd held for 3 months had taught her to see people who might otherwise remain unseen, and now she had the authority to make that visibility meaningful. The company newsletter became a symbol of transformation, not just her personal journey from invisible to influential, but the organization's evolution toward recognizing excellence wherever it existed. The diversity initiative proposal that Maya helped draft represented a fundamental shift in how Henderson and Associates approached talent recognition and development. The document, co-authored with Ms. Rodriguez and supported by Jonathan Henderson, outlined systematic changes designed to identify and nurture overlooked capabilities throughout the organization. Maya's evolution from invisible coffee server to influential consultant had become the template for transforming institutional blindness into organizational strength. Current recruitment practices may be inadvertently screening out qualified candidates who lack traditional markers of professional success, the proposal stated. We recommend implementing skills-based assessment programs that evaluate capability, independent of economic background or educational pedigree. Maya contributed sections based on her own experience navigating corporate culture as an outsider. She wrote about the hidden costs of invisibility, how talented people learn to minimize their contributions rather than risk standing out, how economic necessity often forced capable individuals into positions that wasted their potential, how cultural assumptions prevented organizations from recognizing excellence in unfamiliar forms. The proposal faced predictable resistance from executives who worried about maintaining professional standards and preserving corporate culture. Mr. Peterson argued that traditional hiring practices existed for good reasons, that proven track records in similar organizations were the best predictors of future success. Maya's results with the Elena Vasquez partnership had created space for these conversations to happen at all. Her success provided concrete evidence that unconventional backgrounds could generate exceptional outcomes. That overlooking talent based on traditional criteria was a business mistake rather than a cultural necessity. Maya's presentation to the full executive committee was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in the same conference room where she'd accidentally delivered coffee 3 months earlier. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone present. The invisible woman was now advocating for other invisible people, using her newfound authority to challenge the systems that had nearly kept her hidden permanently. We have 47 employees in support staff positions who possess advanced degrees, Maya reported, her voice steady and confident. 12 have language skills that could enhance our international consulting capabilities. 8 have technical expertise in areas where we currently outsource services. 3 have advanced degrees in fields directly relevant to our core business. She thought of Maria Santos, who had been analyzing financial data with MBA-level sophistication while being paid for basic data entry. She remembered James Chun, whose 4 languages and international relations background made him ideally suited for the cultural consulting work that had become Maya's specialty. The question isn't whether these employees are qualified for expanded roles, Maya continued. The question is whether we can afford to continue wasting their capabilities while competing against firms and recognize and develop talent more effectively. Jonathan Henderson's support was crucial in moving the proposal forward, but Maya realized that systemic change required more than executive approval. It needed cultural transformation at every level of the organization, managers willing to look beyond job descriptions, colleagues comfortable with unconventional career paths, systems designed to identify potential rather than just proven performance. Maya's speech concluded with a personal reflection that connected her individual journey to the broader organizational opportunity. 3 months ago, I was invisible. In this building, my expertise was present, but unrecognized, my potential evident, but unexplored. How many other people are we failing to see? How much excellence are we missing because we're looking for it in the wrong places? Maya's university diploma hung, framed on the wall of her new office, a corner space with windows overlooking the city and a nameplate that read, Maya Santos, Director of International Relations. The document that had gathered dust in her apartment for months now occupied a place of honor, representing not just past achievement, but present validation of worth that had always existed but hadn't always been recognized. Returning to university part-time had been Jonathan Henderson's suggestion, supported by the company's educational benefits program that covered tuition for advanced degrees related to employees' professional development. Maya was pursuing her master's degree in applied linguistics while working full-time, a balance that felt sustainable rather than desperate now that she had economic security and institutional support. The evening classes reminded Maya of why she'd fallen in love with language study initially, the fascinating complexity of how humans communicate across cultural boundaries, the subtle ways that linguistic choices could build bridges or create barriers. Her classmates were a mix of working professionals and recent graduates, and Maya found herself sharing insights from her corporate experience that enriched academic discussions with real-world applications. Her promotion to director had come 6 months after the Elena Vasquez partnership was finalized, a recognition of her expanding role in developing Henderson and Associates' international consulting capabilities. Maya now oversaw cultural liaison services for 12 different language markets, supervised a team of 4 other cultural consultants, and advised on strategic expansion into new international territories. The work challenged her in ways that felt purposeful rather than overwhelming. Maya was building something that extended beyond her individual success, a framework for cross-cultural business, communication that could prevent the misunderstandings that had nearly cost the Elena Vasquez partnership. Her team included other employees who had been promoted from support positions, creating a department that understood both professional excellence and economic necessity. Maya's office had become a destination for employees seeking advice about career transitions and professional development. She mentored administrative assistants who wanted to move into consulting roles, advised security guards on leveraging their international backgrounds, and helped facilities staff document their hidden qualifications for advancement opportunities. University courses provided theoretical frameworks for work she was already doing intuitively. Maya studied organizational behavior, international business communications, and cultural anthropology, concepts that helped her articulate why her approaches were effective and how they could be systematized for broader application. Her master's thesis proposal examined economic barriers to talent recognition in corporate environments and academic exploration of the dynamics she'd experienced personally. Maya was documenting how financial necessity often forced qualified individuals into positions that underutilized their capabilities, and how organizations could modify recruitment and development practices to identify excellence regardless of economic background. The research felt deeply personal but academically rigorous. Maya interviewed dozens of employees who had navigated similar transitions, documenting patterns of hidden expertise and institutional blindness that affected organizations across multiple industries. Her advisor praised the work as groundbreaking research with practical applications for human resource management. Maya's transformation from invisible support staff to influential director had become a case study within Henderson and Associates, but she was more interested in ensuring that her experience became a template rather than an exception. The diploma on her wall represented personal achievement, but the real measure of success would be how many other people could follow similar paths from invisibility to recognition. She was no longer the person delivering coffee to conference rooms. She was the person designing systems to ensure that other coffee deliverers could be seen for their true capabilities. The journey from invisible to indispensable had taught her that potential existed everywhere, waiting for the right moment and the right person to recognize its value. The mentorship program manual that Maya created was titled Recognizing Hidden Excellence, a guide to talent development in diverse workplaces. The document represented months of research, interviews, and practical experimentation with programs designed to identify and develop overlooked capabilities throughout Henderson and Associates. Maya's personal journey from invisible support staff to executive leadership had become the foundation for systematic organizational change. The program focused particularly on first-generation college graduates and recent immigrants, people whose backgrounds often included significant capabilities that traditional recruitment processes failed to recognize. Maya understood the unique challenges these employees faced, the pressure to accept any available position rather than wait for ideal opportunities, the difficulty of building professional networks without existing connections, the tendency to minimize their own qualifications rather than advocate for advancement. Maya's work with Carlos Martinez became the program's first major success story. Carlos had been working in the mailroom while completing his accounting degree at night school. His previous experience as a financial analyst in El Salvador, overlooked because his credentials weren't easily transferable to American corporate environments. Maya helped him document his international experience, connected him with relevant training opportunities, and advocated for his transition into Henderson and Associates' financial analysis department. I thought my education and experience in El Salvador didn't count here, Carlos told Maya during their monthly mentoring session. You helped me understand that it wasn't worthless. It was just invisible to people who didn't know how to see it. Maya's program expanded beyond individual mentoring to include systemic changes in how Henderson and Associates approached talent identification. She worked with human resources to develop skills assessment tools that evaluated capability independent of traditional credentials, created professional development pathways that allowed employees to transition gradually between departments, and established sponsorship programs that connected high-potential employees with senior executives who could advocate for their advancement. The corporate culture began shifting in ways that surprised even Maya. Executives started asking different questions during staff interactions, looking for hidden capabilities rather than just immediate task completion. Managers began viewing support staff as potential colleagues rather than permanent fixtures in subordinate roles. The company's recruitment practices expanded to include partnerships with community, colleges, and immigrant service organizations. Maya's favorite part of the program was the quarterly recognition events where employees shared stories of professional growth and career transitions. Maria Santos presented her analysis of international market opportunities, drawing on her MBA training and cultural background. James Chun discussed his new role in the International Relations Department, using his language skills and cultural knowledge to support expansion into Asian markets. Henderson and Associates was becoming known in the business community for its innovative approach to talent development, attracting attention from other organizations interested in implementing similar programs. Maya frequently spoke at professional conferences about the business value of recognizing hidden excellence, sharing strategies for identifying and developing overlooked capabilities. The mentorship program manual wasn't just a guide for talent development. It was Maya's way of ensuring that other invisible people could become visible, that other overlooked individuals could find pathways to recognition and advancement. Her greatest professional achievement wasn't her own promotion, but creating systems that multiplied opportunities for others. The golden coffee service set sat on the credenza in Maya's corner office, a gift from Jonathan Henderson that had arrived on the first anniversary of her promotion to Director of International Relations. The elegant silver tray, fine china cups, and gleaming coffee pot transformed the symbol of her former servitude into a celebration of her current success. The same hands that had once trembled while delivering coffee to executives now poured coffee for international clients. During high-stakes negotiations, Maya was reviewing final preparations for the quarterly board meeting when she noticed a young woman in the hallway new support staff. Judging by her nervous demeanor and temporary white badge, the woman was balancing a tray of coffee cups with the same careful precision Maya remembered from her own invisible days. Her eyes focused downward to avoid unwanted attention. After the board meeting concluded successfully, with Maya presenting her department's expansion plans for South American markets, she found the young woman cleaning the conference room, methodically wiping down the same mahogany table where Maya's transformation had begun. "I'm Maya," she said gently, causing the woman to look up with startled surprise. "What's your name?" "Sophia, ma'am," the woman replied, her accent revealing Spanish as her first language. "I'm sorry if I'm in your way. I can come back later to finish cleaning." Maya smiled, recognizing the automatic deference she'd once shown to executives who seemed to exist in a different universe. "You're not in my way at all. How long have you been working here?" 2 weeks, Sophia answered, relaxing slightly at Maya's warm tone. "I'm very grateful for this job. I have a degree in international business from Columbia, but it's difficult to find work in my field here." The words hit Maya like an echo from her own past hidden qualifications. Grateful acceptance of underemployment, the quiet resignation to being invisible rather than advocating for recognition. Sophia represented everything Maya had once been, and everything she was now committed to changing. "International business is exactly what my department focuses on," Maya said thoughtfully. "Would you be interested in learning more about our South American expansion projects? We're always looking for people with relevant cultural and linguistic expertise." Sophia's eyes widened with surprise and hope. "I would be very interested, but I don't want to presume." "You're not presuming," Maya interrupted gently. "You're exactly the kind of person we need. Sometimes the most valuable expertise comes from unexpected places." Maya thought of her own journey from that first accidental morning in the wrong conference room to this moment of paying forward the recognition that had changed her life. The golden coffee service caught the afternoon light, transforming ordinary objects into symbols of possibility. "Here's my card," Maya said, handing Sophia her business card, the same type of card she'd once thought she'd never possess. "Email me tomorrow, and we'll set up a time to discuss your background and interests." Henderson and Associates has learned that our best consultants often start in unexpected places. As Sophia left the conference room with obvious excitement, Maya reflected on how completely her world had transformed. She was no longer the invisible woman desperate to blend into the background. She was the visible advocate helping others step into the light. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply allow yourself to be seen. But perhaps even more powerful is learning to see others the way you always hoped to be seen yourself.